How do you put a vine to sleep and not produce any fruit one year, but wake it up and produce fruit the next? That is what we will explore in today's session, looking at the growth regulator Ethephon and how this cost-effective tool can be used to rest vineyards. Hi, my name is Matt Holdstock and I'll be today's webinar host. In the spirit of reconciliation, the Adelaide acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today.
Go.
The webinar today will be split into 3 sections, each with their own learning objective. The first section will focus on why you would rest a vineyard. The second section will cover why Ethephon is a good tool to support vineyard resting. And the third section will provide tips on how to use Ethephon. As this webinar is pre-recorded, answering questions live will not be possible. However, if you do have a question, please send it through to the Adelaide Help Desk where all questions will be compiled, answered and sent out to all registered attendees of the webinar. Our presenter today is Professor Paul Petrie. Paul is the Principal Scientist, Viticulture and Program Leader of the Irrigated Crops Group at the South Australian Research and Development Institute based in Adelaide, South Australia. Paul has extensive experience in the Australian wine industry, including key roles at the Australian Wine Research Institute, Treasury Wine Estates and the CSIRO, complemented by his early experience establishing a vineyard with his parents in New Zealand. Paul has a PhD in canopy management and directs a viticultural research group focused on enhancing the resilience and productivity of Australian vineyards and their ability to adapt to climate change. Paul has a strong interest in technology, having developed a smartphone-based thermal camera system for assessing grapevine water status, and is currently working on a project to map grapevine trunk diseases using an action camera. Paul's expertise also extends to the broader horticultural projects, such as developing high-density almond orchards and evaluating the post-bushfire recovery of apples and cherries. Relevant to this webinar, Paul's extensive background includes specific research on the application of Ethephon in viticulture, combined with significant academic and practical industry experience. Something we should also know about today's presenter is that we're lucky to have him. Paul was heading towards a career in professional rugby. However, having one of his ears sewn back on twice steered him back to a career in viticulture. I hope you enjoy the webinar.
Thanks, Matt. So today I'm going to talk about vineyard resting. This project has been completed by myself and my colleague Gaston Sepulveda at SARDI with support from Marcus Bernardo when we were initially setting up the program. As I think most of you are aware, we have an excess of red wine, not just in Australia, but in the world. Wine consumption is decreasing, and especially for reds, this is resulting in depressed prices internationally. In Australia, we've got some very high stock to sales ratio, and it's unlikely that all the fruit will be harvested in this coming season. So we're looking at different options that you can manage a vineyard if you were unlikely to harvest that fruit. When we started this project, so this is about 3 years ago, there wasn't a lot of information available on the subject, and we sort of worked through a range of options. That what would the ideal vineyard resting program have or process include? So starting from scratch, we wanted to avoid harvest because that's a major production cost, and we wanted, with that, by removing the fruit, we wanted to reduce the amount of pesticides you might need to apply, hopefully realise some saving on irrigation water, and generally reduce the number of times you have to drive the tractor through the vineyard. There was, as I said, limited information available. There was some that we were able to draw from the dried fruit industry that remove crop from a portion of their vines, and a small project that had been completed on this topic in New South Wales during the Millennium Drought. That project, while it talked about some of the resting practices, didn't have a lot of information on the carryover effects. So what does the ideal vineyard resting practice look like? Needs to cover off on a range of things. It needs to be effective, so no fruit at the end to harvest. Needs to have minimal or no carryover effects, so you can wake the vineyard up very quickly and easily and return to full yield, as fast as you can. It has to be economical, or as economical as possible when you're not going to harvest the fruit. So we don't want any additional costs. a practice where you have to bring a contractor in to complete the work's not going to be very well received, and it's unlikely to result in a substantial financial saving. And it has to be practical, something that a grower can implement themselves, ideally with equipment that they already have. So for the project, we looked to assess a range of treatments. All the work was carried out on Shiraz in a commercial vineyard near Renmark, clone BBRC30. So one of the treatments we evaluated was double pruning. This is where you would go through and reprune a vineyard that had already been pruned during winter, but in the spring, with the aim of removing the fruit or the inflorescences and reducing the crop for the following season. We chose to do the double pruning or the second pruning at 80% flowering. We chose this point so it was a bit of a balance. You want to do it late enough that the crop won't be able to regrow or re-establish itself, but and if you do it too early, then obviously there's the vine can set a second crop. But if you did it too late, then you don't get enough. The canopy doesn't re-establish itself, and it may impact on the yield for the following season. We also looked at a range of different spray treatments. So we looked at calcium nitrate. So calcium nitrate you'd probably be familiar with more as a fertilizer, but it can also have a burning or a desiccant effect on vines or on plants in general. When we first looked at this treatment, I thought it was going to be really scary and serious, sort of like if you'd sprayed your vineyard with spray seed. That actually wasn't the case. It did certainly burn the canopy, and you can see from the photo there that it burnt the edge of the leaves of the canopy, and it also burnt some of the inflorescences. We applied, in previous work we'd seen that it wasn't so effective with one application, so we tried two applications, one with 10 leaves unfold and a second one at 80% flowering. The third treatment we looked at was Ethephon. Ethephon breaks down to release a plant growth regulator called ethylene. Ethylene is the compound that regulates ripening in fruit. So when you put the banana in the bag with the avocado to ripen the avocado, it's the banana that releases the ethylene that then stimulates the ripening of the avocado. We looked at Ethephon in applied a number of different ways. once in combination with the calcium nitrate. So the calcium nitrate was applied when 10 leaves were unfolded, and then the Ethephon was applied at early fruit set. We tried a second one where we just applied one application of Ethephon at early fruit set, and a third option where we had two applications of Ethephon, one at early fruit set and one at 80% flowering. We're basically interested in sort of what combination might be the most effective, and say if one application didn't work, whether you'd be able to apply a second one to get better effect. All the spray treatments were applied using a sprayer mounted on the back of the ute that ran off a 12-volt power supply in the ute until the canopy was saturated. So basically we kept spraying until we started to see drips of spray going onto the ground. This full water rate is really important. This is what we recommended both for the calcium nitrate and for the Ethephon to be effective. Generally, of all the different methods, and I'll show you some graphs in a second, but generally all the different methods, the Ethephon was the most effective. While it's hard to take a photo of something that's not there, we can see here the rachis of a bunch where all the berries have abscised and fallen off. So in our case, the Ethephon works as an abscission agent, and so that means it basically stimulates the berries to drop off the vine. For most of the bunches, all the berries fell off. For the occasional bunch, there would be a few berries left that were carried then later into the season. But as you'll see from the graph in a second, there was still relatively little fruit on these vines when it came to harvest. In the second season, when we applied the Ethephon, we saw that it had some impact on canopy growth. So the very ends of the shoots sort of went a little bit droopy, like the picture on the left, and then started to become necrotic, so went brown. This likely would have paused or did pause canopy growth. However, it wasn't really noticeable in our situation because the canopies in a region like the Riverland generally don't grow very much after fruit set anyway. The vines start to put their energy into growing, developing and ripening that fruit, as opposed to growing more canopy. So hence the actual size of the canopies didn't change very much. Okay, so now we look at yield. We have this is yield in 2 seasons. So on the left it's the 22-23 season, and on the right it's the 23-24 season. So this is the yield in the season when the Vineyard Resting treatment was applied. We looked at a range of different practices, as I said. So we talk about, in addition to the ones that I described, we also had some where we removed the fruit by hand. So it's 100% thinning and a 50% thinning. But then if we look at generally, you pull all the grapes off by hand. Obviously, that's quite an effective method. The double pruning was more effective in the first season, the 22-23 season, than it was in the 23-24 season. I think this is because in the first season, the shoots that had the bunches on them were cut off when we did the second pruning. However, we went back and were double pruning the same vines again for the second season, and those shoots, the new shoots sort of came from more within the box hedge. So you've got the box hedge and the shoots were coming out of the middle, and because they were coming out of the middle of that box hedge in the second season, when I went to try and cut them off, they were still there. So they were protected by the rest of the canopy, so we didn't cut them all off. With the calcium nitrate, it wasn't so effective in the first season, actually not very effective at all. We've got a control yield of a bit over 30 tonnes a hectare. When we put the calcium nitrate on, we only went down to about 22. Second season, it worked a little bit better. I think especially our first application was at a slightly earlier phenological stage in the second season and was more effective at burning those inflorescences off. However, it still wasn't a really effective treatment. I mean, we've still got over 10 tonnes of fruit in the situation. The treatments that were by far the most effective were the ones that contained the Ethephon, either a single application or as a multiple application. In the first season, that removed the yield or dropped the yield back down under sort of 2.5 tonnes per hectare. And in the second season, there was no fruit at all when we applied the Ethephon, to the point that when we were looking for fruit to do residue testing on, we weren't actually able to even find any for samples. Gaston was sort of phoning me up from the vineyard and saying, I can't find any. I'll go and look harder. But no, there wasn't actually any, there weren't any grapes out there to be sampled. This is just a photo showing where we did the double pruning. That's the 7th of November when we just pruned the canopy. Coming back on 4th of January, it's a little hard to see in the photo there, but effectively there's still a lot of bunches sitting inside that canopy there that I didn't cut off, or I wasn't able to cut off when I did that second pruning. It's also interesting to note that the canopy didn't really recover a lot. You trim it back at that time of the year, and there's not a lot more sort of growth and development that you get in the later in the season. Okay, so the next question is, what happens in the season following the vineyard resting treatment? So this is the season when we wake the vines up. The concept here is that we want the vines to return to a commercial yield or a near to commercial yield, similar to a vine that hadn't been rested. So first up, we look at the return 23-24 season. So these vines were rested in 22-23, return season 23-24. The control, not quite 30 tonnes per hectare. You can see here where we pruned or where we removed fruit manually, those vines didn't put as much energy into the or didn't put a lot of energy into their crop, and actually ended up probably with a little bit higher yield that following season. Most of these treatments all the way across here are looking actually relatively similar to the treatment that was had a full crop the season before, and especially the ones where we've applied Ethephon either by itself or in combination are looking similar or a little bit better than the treatments that had than the control. Okay, we have the second season. So these were vines that were rested for 2 years, so the 22-23 and the 23-24 season, and they were woken up for the 24-25 season. So 2 seasons of vineyard resting. We have a control this time, a little bit over 30 tonnes per hectare. Once again, the vines that were hand thinned looked like they may have had a slightly higher yield. In this case, though, the double pruning and the treatments with the calcium nitrate didn't recover as well. We saw in the previous picture where the canopy of those vines hadn't grown back with the double prune vines, and likewise, we applied the calcium nitrate. We'd burnt the leaves. The vines didn't have as much photosynthetic capacity and therefore as much energy for to grow the following season. For the treatments where the Ethephon was applied, though, either once or 2 applications, their yield is still very similar to the yield of the control, the vines that weren't rested. Yeah. So in the 24-25 season, we looked at a couple other things. We looked at the dose response. So initially, when we set up this trial, we basically chose a rate that was very close to the maximum commercial rate. We applied the Ethephon at 1,000 milligrams per litre, or a gram per litre, and the maximum commercial rate is about 930 milligrams per litre. So right, very close to the maximum commercial rate, just a little bit more. And we thought, well, we wanted to investigate, okay, what would happen if we applied a little bit less Ethephon, or we looked at a range of different concentrations. We did the application at early fruit set because that's when we thought the most effective timing was likely to be. The Ethephon was fully effective down to 800 milligrams per litre, so that's that one here there, and it was still quite effective at 600 milligrams per litre in this situation. So definitely you could consider a lower rate as part of your application, but we do have to remember that The weather especially can impact on the effectiveness of the Ethephon, and this would want to be confirmed in subsequent seasons. The other thing that we tried was the timing of the Ethephon application, or the phenological stage when the Ethephon was applied. So effectively we applied the Ethephon at twice weekly intervals, starting at EL20 and going through to EL31. In this case we used the high rate, or the 1 gram per litre, 1,000 milligrams per litre of Ethephon, and the window was actually a lot larger than I expected. So the Ethephon was effective, or quite effective, from EL20 all the way to EL30. However, we've got to remember that the permit, the AVPMA permit, still talks to EL25 and EL27 has been sort of the target stages for this treatment. Okay, so the other factor that we looked at as part of this trial was the vine's irrigation response. As I said, part of the project, or as I described at the start, part of the project was to see how we could reduce inputs. And in some seasons, water is a very major or a significant management cost, and hence, if we're able to save irrigation as part of a vineyard resting process, this could be quite an effective management practice. We used 3 levels of irrigation, so 7 megalitres per hectare, which is about standard for the region. About half that, 3.5 megalitres per hectare, and then another one at about 2 megalitres per hectare. And we looked at that in combination of 3 different crop loads. So 100% normal crop, 50% about half the crop removed, and 0 with all the crop removed. We did this for 2 seasons, and then we returned the vines to normal irrigation, so back to that 7 megalitres a hectare again, basically to see how they would wake up and whether removing the crop meant that the vines could cope with less irrigation. Okay, so these results aren't as marked as the results that we saw when we applied the Ethephon, but it still looks like the crop removal had some effect. So we can see here our controls that about 34 tonnes per hectare with full irrigation in the season when so this is the reduced irrigation, low irrigation, but this is the season when all these vines will return and receive the same amount of water. So, low water application for 2 years, the vines, didn't come back to full production that next year following. However, when we'd removed the fruit, especially the 100% thinning treatment, it looked like these treatments, these vines recovered better because we had removed all that fruit from them. Okay, so just a few practical comments about Vineyard Resting. We are about to release a fact sheet that contains a bit of this information as well. The Ethephon application was all done on a full rate or a full water rate. So we do not recommend concentrate spraying for applying Ethephon. We don't believe that that's likely to be effective. So yeah, you need to use a high water rate for this practice. The Ethephon is potentially compatible with some other fungicides, so you could mix it, like tank mix it with other fungicides as part of your application. Adama, who's one of the larger suppliers of Ethephon, have done some compatibility testing, and your retailer that you buy the Ethephon from may be able to provide you some more advice, or your consultant can provide you some more advice on what the compatibility is likely to be. In some of the earlier work with Ethephon, pH was an issue, so the effectiveness changed depending on the pH of the water that the Ethephon was mixed with. So some care needs to be taken there, although I think the formulations have improved and that's not quite the same issue as it used to be. Temperature can also impact on the effectiveness of Ethephon. Ethephon is also used as a harvest aid in cotton, and in that situation they recommend it should be used at temperatures higher than 17 degrees. But it can also be used in conditions when it is too hot and have a sort of a negative effect too, so you have to be careful. If you have a spur prune vineyard, so this work was done with machine prune vineyards, but if you had a spur prune vineyard and it had a small bunch zone, you don't necessarily need to apply the Ethephon to the whole canopy. You could just set your sprayer up, turn off some of the nozzles, and basically just spray the bunches in the bunch zone. So it's where the Ethephon contacts the bunches that will have its effect. The AWRI has applied for minor use permit, or a minor use permit for the use of Ethephon. That permit allows, or the new permit, so a new permit has come out just for this season, and it should be in place until 2030. That permit allows for 2 applications per year, per season, but based on our results, we think that 1 application should be sufficient. They also had a permit in place for calcium nitrate, but they've allowed that permit to lapse as we didn't see the calcium nitrate as a very effective method for vineyard resting. We completed residue tests where we were able to source fruit. When there was fruit left, we completed residue testing both in the season when the Ethephon was applied and in the season following the application of Ethephon. That's the season when you're much more likely to harvest the fruit for winemaking. In neither of those cases did we detect any residues in the fruit. Okay, so these figures come from 2023, but my understanding is that the price hasn't changed significantly for the Ethephon. The label rate is 936 milligrams per litre. I'm not sure where that number came from. I like round numbers, and I thought 1,000 milligrams per litre would be much more sensible, but 936 is what we have. One of the major products is, as I said, an Adama product, Promote Plus. The price is around $300, $350 for a 20-litre container. This one has a concentration of 900 grams per litre of Ethephon. So at a full water rate, this is based on the Riverland with a whole canopy, 2,000 litres per hectare, you would end up using about $35 per hectare of product for a vineyard resting treatment. Obviously, if you have smaller canopies, then you probably wouldn't need as much Ethephon. The Ethephon is available from other manufacturers with smaller containers, so if you don't necessarily need the full 20 litres, get in touch with your retailer and ask them to order in a smaller container for you. So here for acknowledgements, I'd like to acknowledge the technical staff that supported us with the Vineyard Resting trial, Tony, who hosted us at his vineyard in Renmark, Marcel and Robin, who helped with the some of the project scoping and the application of the application for the AVPMA permit, and Katie from New South Wales DPI, who ran a similar trial in parallel to this one for a couple seasons on Chardonnay. I would also like to acknowledge Wine Australia, who in conjunction with SARDI helped fund this research. Thank you very much. My understanding is that if you have questions, you will be able to email them in following this, watching this webinar, and then I can help address them. Cheers.
Thank you, Paul, for the presentation today. I would also like to acknowledge Wine Australia for providing funding and support for the webinars via the Adelaide Extension and Communication Project. And once again, remind you, should you have a question, please send them through to the Adelaide Help Desk. I hope to see you at the next webinar.
We acknowledge the lands of the traditional custodians across Australia. We recognise Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples' continuing connection to land, water and sky country. We acknowledge the wine regions and hundreds of different nations around this continent, and the ancient soils on which we stand and grow. From the Wadani salt bush peoples of Margaret River in our west, to the East Coast Sunrise people of the Yuin Nation, and the Southern Island and salt bush peoples of the Nioni peoples of Tasmania. Today and always, we pay our deep respects to the custodians, those who went before and those who will follow, as the knowledge holders of tomorrow. This is Australia.